Yes, welcome to our poetry workshop brought to you by Help at Hand as a part of the 10th annual Jack's Poetry Fest. Every April, Help at Hand partners with a consortium of poets, cultural institutions, art agencies, and poetry enthusiasts to celebrate National Poetry Month with a special festival of poetry. Help at Hand is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides poetry therapy sessions for vulnerable and at-risk youth, which facilitate healing and personal growth through the use of poetry, creativity, art, and therapeutic approaches. Today's workshop on telling stories through poetry or narrative poetry is led by facilitator Shutta Crum. Shutta is an award-winning poet and children's book writer. She is a Robinson Jeffers Tour House honoree poet 2024. More than 150 of her poems have appeared in journals. A push cart nominee, she is the recipient of 9 Royal Palm Literary Awards in Florida and has 3 chapbooks in print, as well as 3 novels and 15 children's books. She publishes The Wordsmith's Playground. Thank you. Shutta, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, good. I see you have a few more people coming in. As I said to some of the people who were here early, this is the first time I've done this workshop, so we'll see how it goes. I have no idea about the length of time, but I will try to leave time at the end so we can share. And there is a section with a writing that allow you to do some writing. So let me share my screen and open up the slides. Okay. Now I want to make this full screen. Okay, there we go. Can everybody see that? Shake your head. Okay. All right, good. Okay, so the Jack's 2025 Poetry Fest. So we're going to be talking about telling stories through poetry, or really what I just call narrative poetry. A lot of poems are narrative in nature, some more so than others. So let's talk about ones that are particularly narrative in that they tell a story. So these are some aspects that define a narrative poem. It has a storyline through time. Now that time can be very, very short. It can just be a moment's amount of time, but it does tell a story with kind of a beginning, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, when I say end, I mean a resolution of some sort. We'll talk about endings in a little bit. I don't mean a summation or a conclusion or an explanation. Those are one of the things that I just detest in poetry. You need to leave a poem with your reader so that they can take it in and interpret the way they need to interpret it in response to their own life experiences. But anyway, we'll get onto that in a little bit. Also, a narrative poem tends to focus more on plot than emotion, whereas a lyrical poem may go through all kinds of emotions or delve deeply into grief or sorrow or love or whatever. But a narrative poem is more focused on the events, the actions, and it has a narrator. This is something I like to talk about too. A lot of people do not think about their narrators, even if the narrator is simply you, the author. Every narrator has a point of view. Every narrator, including yourself, has an attitude toward what they are putting on the page. So we have a narrator, we have a plot, we have a timeline, and of course they can use all the typical poetic techniques of lyric poetry. It can be very musical, it can be metaphorical, but it still has to tell that story. Okay. So here are some historic examples that you all probably know very well. Ballad like The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, epic like Beowulf or Gilgamesh, an idyll like Idols of the King by Alfred Tennyson, or a lay, and those were romantic kinds of things that came about during, oh, I don't know, in France and during a period where everything was romantic. But anyway, in fact, I remember The Highwayman. The first time I read The Highwayman, I read, oh my God, what a wonderful, sad, beautiful story. I loved that poem. Anyway, so those are some classic examples. But as you know, these are very long. I mean, there's also Casey at the Bat, other kinds of narrative poems, and they go to great length. But as I said, it's a little story in time, and that can be very short. It can be simply, I don't know, about going to Walmart and opening your car door and seeing how your child looks at you. But it's little moments, little movements through all the way through the story. So it doesn't have to be these great, long, heroic things or battles against, right and wrong. All right. It does have a starting point. Now that starting point, especially because today's poetry is shorter than Beowulf or Gilgamesh or Rime of the Ancient Mariner, that starting point should be close to the action. We're going to look at some examples. In other words, you don't need to start way back, like why you were going to Walmart and you ran out of milk and this happened and this happened, and then suddenly you get to the little bit that you want to write about, that you actually want to write about. So we want to start close to the action. It has characters and it has a narrator, so it can include dialogue and monologue. As I said, the narrator has a point of view. If you have characters, they have a point of view in the story as well. The conflict is simply what happens. Now, it doesn't have to be chronological. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. It can kind of jump all over the place. Think about some movies like Pulp Fiction or Memento and things where they start backwards and go forwards. But what happens in the middle has to feel right by the time you get to the end. Okay, so there are things that happens, but it doesn't have to be strictly chronological. Of course, like any piece you write, it's going to have a voice and a mood, and that voice is a great deal of that voice depends on the narrator's point of view. It can be serious, humorous, mystical, religious, snarky, as long as it's events happening in a story. Okay. I'm going through my notes here to the side. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So here's a beginning of a well-known poem, The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. You see the highlighted area there. We've got like 3 lines setting the stage, but it starts close to the action. Suddenly there came a tapping. That's the action, that's the start. And you aren't going to spend a lot of time like why he suddenly is in his chair and what he's reading and all of that. We get it fairly quickly on in the poem. There's another poem I want to refer to by Elizabeth Bishop called The Fish, if you get a chance to read that. A wonderful poem about simply bringing up a fish she's caught as a child on her fishing line. And the action starts out with the very first sentence. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water with my hook fast in the corner of his mouth. So she starts with the very first sentence with the action. Okay, so we're going to start very close to the beginning. Now, narrative poems have middles as well. So here's the whole poem, a really well-known poem by Gwendolyn Brooks, The Pool Players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool. We love school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing gin. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon. So you can see the middle section has all of the steps that lead to that ending. We die soon. It doesn't have to be in chronological order, as I said, but there needs to be events or things that lead up so it makes sense when you get to the end, to the conclusion. Um, okay, now I also want to read, yes, let me read this poem by Billy Collins, and you can see a little bit more about the beginning, the setup, and the ending, the fallout. In the morning, when I found History snoring heavily on the couch, I took down his overcoat from the rack and placed its weight over my shoulder blades. It would protect me on the cold walk into the village for milk and paper, and I figured he would not mind, not after our long conversation the night before. How unexpected his blustering anger when I returned covered with icicles, the way he rummaged through the huge pockets, making sure no major battle or English queen had fallen out and become lost in the deep snow. I like this poem. You can see, well, it has a lot of humor, obviously. It uses personification, all the way through, but still it is a story. It has a beginning. He took the overcoat from the rack and put it on. So we have the start, we have a middle, he's going to the village and doing this stuff. And then we have this fallout that comes to the end. And it has characters. We talked about characters. It has a point of view. We have the point of view of the narrator here who's befuddled by why history is suddenly all upset. His assumption, like it's fine, it won't matter much. We got along well. There's this whole backstory to this poem, but you don't need to give us the backstory. It's like any good writing, any good short story or novel. There's all this backstory that you can infer. They probably had a great night the night before, sitting and talking and maybe drinking some wine or beer, whatever. They got along great. And then all of a sudden, this has happened. So it's this small amount of time with the steps leading through to the ending, to a conclusion that makes this a narrative poem. I love that. Now, also there's a certain mood here. There's humor and we've all kind of been in this situation where something hasn't gone the way you thought it was going to go. Excuse me. So now I'm going to read one of my poems simply because it is a narrative poem and it talks to mood. We talked about voice and mood. So here's a poem of mine. It's a published poem called The Canoeist. And I start out right at the beginning as well, right with the action. Okay. He travels the river, raising only a ripple fore and aft. His paddle perfects silver spirals upon the surface, the only sound the plink and plunk of water as he dips into silence. He passes homes, manicured lawns, boat docks. He hears children, people wave or stare from their deck chairs. A heron rises from the reeds. Now, fewer watch his passing. He will not return. They know well what is downstream, where the current stalls, where cattails, water lilies, spatterdocks encroach and roots catch. Of an evening, some will walk to the water's edge and listen for the distant plying of his paddle or the subtle wash of his passage across the surface of the night. They will breathe in the river damp, knowing he is out there where the dark wild closes in. Okay, so there's a certain kind of melancholy mood there. It's quiet, it's still, the canoeist is going along. I start with the action, all of the middle part about the people waving and hearing the children's talks. And then at the end, we get to he is out there where the dark wild closes in. I haven't explained my poem. I haven't summarized my poem. I've ended with a sharp image. I always suggest you end your poem with a good image. Um, it is a metaphorical poem, isn't it, though? It's all about going through life. canoeing through life, and you're going toward the end where the reeds, the spatterdock catch at the canoe. You aren't going to be moving very fast anymore. And it's the dark wild out there, the unexpected, unknowing what comes at the end of life. Now, that's a metaphorical poem, but it's also a narrative poem because it tells this story without me saying, you know, this is life. Like, you don't need to say that. A lot of times, metaphors are inferred. We talked about this in my workshop on writing the metaphorical poem. But it can also be, so we have this personification poem by Billy Collins. We have my metaphorical poem. They can still be narrative poems. All right, let's go on here. Now, I talked about mood. Now let's talk about voice a little bit. As I said, every narrative poem has a narrator or characters. And that's what's really important is a lot of people don't stop to think about their narrator, don't even stop to think about their own voice. You're writing what you see or feel in your poem, but have you stopped to think about what am I bringing to the page by my word choices and by how I've laid it out on the paper? All of those kinds of things are your attitude toward your subject, and that's going to come through. Here is a section from a very strong poem by Richard Sykin, who has chosen to give his narrator this voice. Now, it may not be Richard's voice at all, but he's chosen to give his narrator this kind of snarky voice. I love this. It's very strong. I can tell already you think I'm the dragon. That would be so like me. But I'm not. I'm not the dragon. I'm not the princess either. Who am I? I'm just a writer. I write things down. I walk through your dreams and invent the future. Sure, I sink the boat of love, but that comes later. And yes, I swallow glass, but that comes later. And the part where I push you flush against the wall and every part of your body rubs against the bricks. Shut up. I'm getting to it. What a strong voice that is. And then you see all of that enjambment with that one really long line, flush against the wall, every part of your body rubs up against the bricks. He's telling a story. He's doing it in a little bit of a roundabout way for the whole poem. He gets there, but the narrator's speaking out to you in a very strong voice that's continued through this story. So I do urge you to think about the point of view and what kind of voice you're going to put on the page. It doesn't have to be your voice. It doesn't have to be like Shutta's voice on this page, right? I can write it through a different voice. So think about those things. Those things that are important. It could be a weak voice, a hesitant voice, a fearful voice, but do give your characters a point of view and a voice. All right. I think, good, believe it or not, I'm through most of my slides. We're going to get to our writing and sharing. As I said, I've never done this workshop before. So wasn't quite sure how much time it would take. Um, we're going to do some writing and sharing, but actually, can we stop for a second, Ruth, and I'll just see if there's any questions. If people want to ask a question before we get to the writing, let me get you guys up here so I can see you all.
Of course, you can stop.
Okay, if you have a question at this point before we start writing, and I'll give you some directions about the writing, but anything, just unmute and I can't see everybody, so,
Yes.
okay.
Are are we? Is there like any restrictions? Are we sharing this later at the?
If, oh, if you want to, you do not ever have to share in a
Okay. Is
workshop.
there like a ban against
Oh, what?
vulgar language?
Oh, if the vulgar language is necessary, it's necessary.
Okay.
I also write for children, so I'm careful when I do my writing for children. But yeah, it really depends on the context. If it's just there to sound vulgar, no, leave it out. But
Okay.
otherwise, it's okay. But anyway, we do not all have to share. And in fact, we won't have time for everybody because I think we have 50 or so people here. So I'll just call on a couple of people to share when we get there. Anybody else have a question?
Shasta, I was wondering if you could explain personification a little bit better because you mentioned it earlier.
Okay, yeah, personification is giving human-like qualities to inanimate objects or abstractions. Um, you could say something like, Love walked in the door. Well, love can't actually walk, but I am personifying it. I'm giving it human legs so it can walk in my door. So in the Billy Collins poems, he personifies history as an old guy who fell asleep on his couch after they had a great night together. So I do love personification is a very, very strong element. When we use metaphors, we're comparing things so we understand it clearer. When we use personification, we're comparing things so we understand it better, so you can communicate a little clearer. So I do love personification. I think it's great. And then there's anthropomorphism, which you give human qualities to animals. But anyway, and that happens a lot in children's books. But does that help, Jan? Okay. Any
Yes,
other
thank
questions?
you.
Thank you. Any other questions before we get writing? I can't see everybody, so just speak up. Okay, all right, then let's get writing. Let me get back to my
Will you be
screen here.
sharing the PPT or the slides, Shetta?
It's on tape and they will be sharing the videos. I'm not sure how soon afterward. Hope at Hand will put
Okay.
that up on their website. And I do have a bibliography on my own page of narrative
Okay.
poems for you to look at. So, okay.
Okay. Thank
Yep.
you.
Shutta,
Yep.
can I ask, um, would a haiku be considered a narrative poem, even if it's short?
A haiku? I think
Yeah,
so. Um, I know they're often metaphorical because you've got to think about what they're referring to, what they're comparing with. I have seen senryu or senru, Senyru, which is a type of haiku that deals with people.
right.
So I guess it could be, but it doesn't really have any events in the middle. I don't know if I'd necessarily label them as narrative, but certainly a high bun. Now, a high bun has a prose poetry or prose section first, or somewhere in there. There's a prose bit, and then there's a haiku that goes with it. That haiku could be in the middle, the top, or the bottom of the prose piece. But the haiku, reflects what has been said in the prose piece. So, uh, and Ruth, I just saw that chat question about making sure the channel for Hope at
Thank you.
Hands videos would be nice to have that listed somewhere in the chat if we have it. Okay, guys, let's do some writing. Let me get back to my slides. There we are. All right. Now, I know it's difficult to write a story off the top of your head when you don't have any idea what kind of story you want to write. So I have two options here. So you can, if you're a pantser, a person who just sits down and takes off and whatever comes, you can start a story poem. But remember, start it near the action. And you need some steps along the way and see where it takes you. Now, or if you're a planner, if you're one of those kind of people who like to outline things and think about things ahead of time, you can do this little exercise. Think about what story you want to tell. Um, think about where you're going to begin it. Remember, not way back. Think about the resolution you want to get to. And remember, this is not a summary. Avoid summaries. This is my pet peeve. Avoid summaries and explanations of your poems. Do not end up with something like, and so we've loved each other forever, or something, or you don't need to explain a poem. A poem should be open-ended and often end on a strong image. The reason for I say that is that's the last thing your reader's taking away. That's the last thing they're going to read of that piece. And if you end on an image, then it's going to stick in the mind a lot more. I often say, it takes $100 words to start a short story or a poem, but it takes $1,000 words to end it. You really need a strong ending image or verb or something near the end. So don't summarize, but needs to be somewhat a feeling of that the story's concluded. Like in my poem, he's down in the dark wild. That's it. I don't explain that he's dying or he's getting old or anything like that. And this speaks to, okay, here, since we have time, this speaks to one of my rants I rant about all the time. When you create a piece of art, you create a poem, it's a piece of art, it goes out into the world. It is a piece of art. Anyone who looks at it, reads it, can take anything they want from it. They do not have to take what you started out writing about. You may have an intention to write, I don't know, about, it's about love. And instead, they take it to mean the striving of everyday life. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Your intention after your poem has gone out into the world doesn't matter. What matters is that you've communicated to your reader and they have taken that poem into their lives, into their heart, and bounced it off their own experiences. It's the same way as if you would go into a museum and look at fine art. You would not want a little label next to it saying, well, you should feel sad when you see this poem because this, or this picture because this happened. I don't want anyone telling me how I should feel about the art I am experiencing. I feel it because it means something to me, the viewer, the reader. So that's my whole rant on endings. Don't summarize, but do feel like there's some kind of conclusion to the end of your story. Okay. And then, of course,
Shutta,
yes,
this is Bonnie. Can I ask a question
sure.
about writing from a different point of view?
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess I always feel like I have to write from my point of view. And I almost feel like if I'm writing from a different point of view, like, I don't know, the gardener outside, that I have to explain to my reader that it's not me, that it's the gardener that's talking, but I don't need to do that. Is that right?
That's right. You don't need to do that. You can even use I. You can even use the I pronoun. But if you're talking about, I put flowers into the dirt, I go home to my wife, they're going to get the clue that it's not necessarily you writing that. And it is quite okay. One of the ways to practice a little bit with that is to write ekphrastic poetry, and that is poetry in response to art. So you look at the art and put yourself into that picture, and you can write from that point of view of whatever's in the picture. So that's one way to exercise that and work with that till you get comfortable. Okay. All right. So we want to have some complications or acts or events. Oh, Renee also raised her hand. Just a second, Renee. And then I want you to think that there should be a character or characters of some kind, and maybe what kind of voice and mood you want. So if you just want to jot outline notes, that's fine. Or you can just start and go with it. All right. We got Renee who has raised her hand. We have time. Renee, what's your question?
I'm just thinking of like in high school and college and having to read some of the poems you mentioned, like the ballads or the Iliad. Like, the professor isn't there's a point where the professor is gonna be like, no, you're wrong. So I mean, but is that like if someone's interpreting a poem their own way, there's a point where they're wrong, right? Or you're saying basically no.
Not always, no, because
Um,
again, well, there's a wonderful Billy Collins poem about writing poetry where professors tie the poem to a chair and beat it with leather straps because they want you to, they torture the poem because they want you to get specifically what the professor wants you to get out of it. Now, a lot of poetry is looked at in relation to history what's happening at that time, who that writer was, if there were Greek wars going on or whatever that you might not be aware of. But certainly how you feel about the poem and how you interpret it and use it in your own life is totally up to you. And there is no right or wrong.
I see.
None.
Thank you.
All right, I hope that helps.
That's why I have another question, if that's okay.
Okay.
When you say summary, I don't totally understand what that means. Like, don't summarize a poem. Can you give us some examples, maybe?
Oh, my God, I have to get some examples offhand. A lot of times, a poet, because you want a conclusion. I mean, it feels human and natural to want a conclusion to things. I mean, we want things to conclude when there's a story. But a lot of times I will see quote unquote bad poetry that summarizes it by saying, oh, something like, if it's a story, if it's a poem, say about domestic violence, they might summarize it saying, she lived 14 years with this monster and then finally left him. I don't need to know that. I just want to know the events that's happening in her everyday life, and if it's a lyrical poem, how she's feeling about it. But I don't need a summary of the poem at the end. I don't need you to make a hard and fast stop. You know, this is what this poem means. Boom. Um, Somebody might say something like, and still we loved each other. I don't need to know that. If I see this beautiful poem where hands are touching or you're just sitting on a couch cuddling together, I don't need a line saying, and still they loved each other. I just don't need that summary because I know it. I can feel it. And if you just use strong enough verbs and good adjectives and not overloaded the adjectives, that's another pet peeve of mine. Um, your reader will get what you're aiming at, and you can just end it with a strong image. And he leaned over and kissed her ear. That's a much better ending than, and they loved each other, for the 50 years of their marriage. If you can end on an image that's strong, and if it's a love poem, it's beautiful or tragic, that's a much stronger ending. Okay, anything else? Anybody? Okay, let's write for a bit. It's 12:38, so I'm going to give you, because it does take some time to do this, 40. Let's come back at 12:50. Oh, somebody just entered the room. Let's come back at 12:50. That's 12 minutes. It's not a lot time to write a whole piece, but at least you can get started. And that'll give us 10 minutes at the end for a couple of people to share and any last questions. Okay, so please mute yourself and let's write. About 3 more minutes. Okay, 1 more minute, so let's wrap that up. And while you're doing that, I am going to go on to the next slide because it has oh, there it is. Some information about me, contacting me, the covers of my 3 imprint chapbooks. And also I want to mention, Ruth mentioned it in the introduction, I write a monthly newsletter called The Wordsmith's Playground. You just need to go to shutta.com if you'd like to sign up to get it once a month. I do not do any hard sales pitch at all. It's a link to one of my articles I've written, I don't know, many, maybe 100 professional articles on how to write. So it's a link to one of my articles that I write for either the Florida State Poetry Association or the Florida Writers Association or the Poetry Society of Michigan, or SCBWI, which is the Children's Society of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So I have a link to an article. I have a monthly prompt. I have sometimes a freebie I hand out from one of my workshops, or a poem, a new poem that's gotten published somewhere. And then I also talk about book covers. I try to, especially with children's books, covers are so important because that's the first thing people see. So I have a little monthly thing on a cover or artwork in a book. And then I'm going to bring this up. So while we share, those of you who would like to do a feedback, please do that. It's important to me, to Ruth, to Hope at Hand. If they get good responses to my workshops, they might invite me back. Who knows? So I'm going to bring up my full screen so I can see everybody again. All right, there we go. Ruth, do you want to stop the share in case people don't want their little bits of things they've written? You're muted, Ruth.
I want you to go to the next slide, which is the thank you.
Okay, before we do that, okay.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, let me do that next. Okay, there we are. These are the organizations who have very kindly underwritten these programs that are going on all month. And somebody, I think it was my friend Susan who is here, who said that she was just amazed by all the offerings over the whole month from Hope at Hand at the Jack's Poetry Fest. Okay. So now.
Okay, yeah, someone asked for the link. You'll be getting a follow-up email with the links to that survey. So if you take this down, Shadow, we can wrap.
Okay. Okay, I gotta stop my share. Stop share. Okay, there we are. Okay, so I hope some of you at least got a start. Would anybody like to share what they've gotten? Or if you're one of the planners, just a couple of ideas about where you might go with something. I can't see everybody. So please, Ruth, if you see somebody with a hand up or wave, let me know. Anybody would like to share anything?
Bonnie and um, Renee and Susan H. have their hands up.
Okay, Bonnie, can you unmute and let us know what you have?
And I actually think Susan had her hand up first, and then Renee, and then I was last.
Oh, okay. Susan, unmute.
Very kind, Bonnie. Okay, here's what I got. A little rough, but we're okay. The pond was our escaping place. Winter, spring, summer, and fall, we gathered, eyeing each other, trying to figure out what might have happened back home. The houses, sitting so close together, were left far behind us as we ran down the path toward our protected preserve. Every year, we all waited impatiently for winter. Winter delivered a unique freedom like none other. Blades cutting through clear frozen glass, blades like tines, clipping metallic echoing, getting closer and closer to neighboring knives.
Great, strong image at the end. I feel it's a little bit more imagistic than narrative. You've got a lot of beautiful images there, especially that last one. Wow. And I think if this was going to be truly a narrative poem, you would start with we ran down to the pond. You'd leave out that bit about how the neighborhood and the pond was all, because that's all backstory. That's
I
all
get
stuff
that.
you know up here.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
your reader doesn't need to know it to get the story.
perfect.
You see what I mean? Okay.
Totally.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Who was next? Was it Renee? Unmute, please.
Yeah, hi. It's
Hi.
not done. I don't know. I'm a pantser, so I don't even know where I'm going.
That's okay. This is automatic writing. We don't expect anything polished at this point. So go ahead.
The poem was meant to be pretty and beautiful as he sat in his armchair thinking good thoughts about love. He looked out the window, staring at the raven above. Oh no, ravens mean bad luck, he cried as he ran to turn on hot water, thinking he'd catch a cold. He poured out black gook instead. Screaming, he ran to the window to see the raven fly off. Oh, the curse is over. I'm saved. Then his radiator stopped rattling. He kicked it and shivered. Oh no, the hot water. He ran to the hall, knocking on neighbors' doors. Oh no, no one is home. He he ran down the stairs to see, sorry, he ran down the stairs of his tenement, banged on the super's door. No one answered. He ran outside to buy Tetley tea, but pulled out no money. Oops. He ran back to his apartment, patted his pockets, keys at home. He stood at the front door, feeling the freeze. His super came out, carrying the boiler and pipes. He scolded his super, but the super replied, Ron, don't you remember we're replacing the boiler and changing the pipes? Sorry, I, 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 I sent everyone a letter last week. Ron was silent and started back up the stairs, head down. He never checks the mail. One step up, wait, Pat! Ron turned around and opened the front door. Can you let me in my apartment?
Okay. I think, well, you've got lots of little bits and pieces there. First of all, Ron should be mentioned up earlier, so we know his name earlier than later when you're going to work on revisions to this. Um, And I like the fact that you had characters and you had certain voices through the whole thing. You would start a little bit later with the ravens jumping out right away or the cold right away and get rid of some of the extra backstory at the beginning. So good work, though. Anybody else want to share? Bonnie had to leave.
No, I'm right here.
Oh, is she? Oh, a different Bonnie. Okay.
A different one.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. And I've been working on this, so I worked on it while we had time.
Okay.
This is called downsizing. The idled eat standing up, mouth and hand, reflexive involuntary organs, sweet and savory, long lost among the senses. Still, we shovel in tasteless comfort. We walk a tired wound, let it play out. Blood knitting, scab making, fresh hemorrhage, over and again. Life is rise and destruction, unapologetic moments without notice. Grief in fractions, embodiment chipped away, compounding into unexpandable implosion. We become crumb, jagged refuse, reimagined firmament under tender souls.
That is a lovely, lovely poem, Bonnie. I would say it's a lyrical poem rather than a narrative poem. Each of those steps along the middle doesn't lead to, I mean, they're all feelings. And narrative poems tend to look more at events rather than, you know, compounding into explosion, the grief, the life is rise and destruction. All of those things are emotional beats, which is beautiful in a lyrical poem, but it doesn't necessarily always, you still have to have these steps, you know, like we shovel in the tasteless. That's a great, great spot to start for a narrative poem. In the very first line, it's an action. So you have to think a little bit when you're thinking about narrative poems, think more about actions, steps taken rather than how you feel or how it compounds and how it affects your life and all of those wonderful things that you would have in a more lyrical poem. Okay, good. Anybody else want to share? We got two more raised hands. Let's see what time it is.
Shada,
Oh, yeah.
can I just stop the recording now? You can continue, but let's just call this a wrap for the recording. It was a wonderful workshop. Thank you so much, Shada. And we'll see you all at the next workshop, which is Wednesday. And so have a good afternoon, everyone. Shada's going to continue after this, but.
Okay.